The morning of my wedding, I stood in front of a floor-length mirror in a suite that smelled like fresh gardenias and pressed linen, and I thought that I was the luckiest woman alive. My dress was a silk crepe ivory column gown I had spent 4 months choosing. My makeup artist had just finished the last coat of mascara. My best friend of 19 years, Dana Cho, was standing 2 feet behind me in her dusty rose bridesmaid gown, holding a glass of champagne in one hand and wiping her eyes with the other. She said I looked like something out of a movie. I believed her. That was at 9:30 in the morning. By 2 in the afternoon, I was no longer the maid of honor at my own wedding. By 4, my mother-in-law was standing at the altar beside my groom holding my bouquet of white peonies. And by 6, when the reception music started playing and the champagne tower was poured, every single person in that ballroom knew the truth except the one who had just become my husband. My name is Renata Solís, and I need to tell you what happened, because even now, almost 3 years later, the shape of that day still surprises me. Not the cruelty of it. I had been watching that cruelty gather for 2 years like a storm front building just off the horizon. What surprises me is how long I waited before I finally let it break. If you are watching this, I want you to stay until the end. Because the part that changed my life entirely did not happen at the altar. It happened 11 days later, in a conference room on the 42nd floor of a building I owned 40% of, when the truth landed in front of everyone who needed to see it. Let me start 2 years before the wedding, because that is where this story really begins. I met Marcus Delgado at a mutual friend's rooftop dinner in Austin in September, 4 years before we married. He was tall, quietly confident, the kind of man who listened before he spoke and meant what he said when he did. He worked in commercial real estate, acquisitions specifically, and I was 3 years into building a mid-sized event production company called Solís Creative that was doing just under $2 million in annual revenue at the time. We talked for 4 hours that first night. He called me the next morning. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Within a year, I had met his mother. Rosario Delgado was 63 years old, born in Monterrey, raised in San Antonio, and the kind of woman who communicated everything important through behavior and nothing important through words. She was impeccably dressed every time I saw her. Silver hair cut to the jaw. A small gold cross at her collarbone. She hugged me warmly the first time we met, complimented my dress, and said, in Spanish that was clearly intended for Marcus and not for me, that I seemed like a sweet girl. I speak fluent Spanish. I did not correct her assumption. That was the first mistake I made with Rosario Delgado. I let her believe I was less than I was, and once she believed it, she built an entire architecture of behavior on top of that foundation. The signs were small at first, the way small things always are. She referred to my company as Claire's Little Events Business in conversations with family, even after I explained what we did and for whom. She would talk over my professional updates at Sunday dinners the way you talk over a child's drawing when the adults need to discuss something real. When Marcus and I got engaged, 18 months into our relationship, she cried happy tears and immediately began calling his Aunt Fernanda to share the news before Marcus had even finished telling his own siblings. I told myself it was enthusiasm. That was the second mistake. The engagement was announced in January. By March, Rosario had begun describing herself to people as the wedding coordinator. This was not a title anyone had given her. Marcus had proposed with a ring he designed himself, a princess-cut diamond set in brushed white gold, and we had agreed together, in our kitchen over takeout, that we wanted something intimate. 120 guests. A venue outside Austin with an olive grove and string lights. Dana as my maid of honor. Marcus's younger brother Emilio as his best man. Simple. Clean. Ours. Within 60 days, Rosario had contacted the venue directly, requested a meeting without telling us, and submitted a revised catering preference sheet on our behalf that swapped the wood-fired menu we had chosen for a traditional catered spread she preferred. The venue manager called me, confused, asking which menu we actually wanted. That was the first time I sat Marcus down and said, plainly, that something needed to be addressed. He listened. He nodded. He called his mother. Rosario cried. The catering stayed our original choice. Marcus apologized to me that night and told me she meant well. I told him I understood that meaning well and doing harm were not mutually exclusive. He agreed. 3 weeks later, Rosario hosted a bridal shower for me at her house that I had not been consulted about, inviting 40 women, 20 of whom I had never met, and centering the entire event around a family slideshow of Marcus's life that somehow contained only 4 photographs in which I appeared. I sat at the head of the table in a sash that said bride and smiled for 4 straight hours. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The summer before the wedding, things accelerated. Rosario began calling my vendors directly. The florist, the photographer, the string quartet I had booked for the ceremony. She introduced herself as Marcus's mother and the wedding's primary coordinator, and several vendors, reasonably, assumed this meant she had authority to make changes. The florist called me in August to confirm the change from white peonies to red dahlias. I told her nothing had changed. The photographer called in September to say he had received an email from a Rosariad at an address I did not recognize, requesting the shot list be restructured to lead with extended family portraits rather than the couple's portraits. I told him to disregard the email. Each time something like this happened, I told Marcus. Each time, Marcus called his mother. Each time, Rosario cried and said she was only trying to help, that she had so much experience with these things, that she just wanted the day to be perfect. And each time, Marcus came back to me a little quieter, a little more apologetic, carrying the invisible weight of a man caught between 2 women he loved and lacking the will to simply choose himself. I understood the dynamic. I did not accept it as permanent. But I also, and this is the part one carry the most responsibility for, did not draw a line that had real consequences attached to it. I asked. I explained. I expressed. I did not act. And Rosario, who was a sophisticated reader of social dynamics, understood exactly what my patience meant. It meant she had room to keep moving. By October, 2 months before the wedding, Rosario had begun suggesting, in the way that people like her make suggestions, that it might be meaningful for her to stand with Marcus at the altar. Not instead of Dana. In addition to Dana. She framed it as a Latin family tradition, which Marcus confirmed existed in some form though not in their family specifically. She mentioned it first at a Sunday dinner, casually, as though it had just occurred to her. Then she mentioned it again the following week in a phone call with Marcus that he told me about afterward. Then she mentioned it to his Aunt Fernanda, who mentioned it to his cousin Pilar, who brought it up at Thanksgiving as though it were already settled. I said no. Clearly, directly, without apology. I told Marcus that Dana was my maid of honor, that the roles in our ceremony were set, and that his mother being emotionally close to him did not entitle her to a structural place in our wedding that we had not offered her. Marcus agreed with me. He told his mother no. Rosario called me 4 days later. It was a Tuesday evening. Marcus was at a work dinner. I was at my office reviewing contracts for a corporate event we were producing in January. She spoke warmly. She told me she understood, that she respected the decision, that she only wanted what was best for Marcus and for our marriage. I thanked her. I thought it was over. It was not over. What I did not know was that between that Tuesday phone call and the morning of our wedding, Rosario had been having private conversations with Marcus that I was not told about. She had been, I would learn later, building a case. She told him I was keeping him from his family. She told him that the wedding had become about my vision and not about them as a unit. She invoked his late father, who had died when Marcus was 17, and said that his father would have wanted her at his side on the most important day of his life. She said this more than once. She said it at moments she had clearly chosen for their emotional precision. I did not know any of this on the morning of our wedding. I was standing in that ivory gown, smelling gardenias, watching Dana cry happy tears, believing I was the luckiest woman alive. The first sign that something was wrong came at 11:15. My wedding planner, a sharp and organized woman named Giselle Torres who I had hired specifically because she did not tolerate chaos, came to the bridal suite and asked to speak with me privately. She closed the door behind her. Her expression was the expression of someone who had been rehearsing what to say and had not found a version she liked. "Claire," she said. "There has been a last-minute change to the ceremony lineup that Marcus has approved. I want you to hear it from me before the processional." I remember feeling the champagne glass in my hand. I remember setting it down very carefully on the vanity. "What change?" I said. "Rosario will be walking in the processional. She will stand to Marcus's left during the ceremony, between him and Emilio. Dana is still your maid of honor, but the bouquets have been switched. Rosario asked that the white peonies go to her for the photographs, and Marcus agreed. Dana will carry the secondary arrangement." I stood there for a moment. The room was very quiet. Giselle was watching me with the careful attention of someone who had seen this kind of thing before and was waiting to see what I would do. "Where is Marcus?" I said. "He's with the groomsmen. He asked me to let you know he'll explain after the ceremony. He said his mother had a difficult morning." There it was. He would explain after the ceremony. After the vows. After the photographs. After Rosario stood at his left with my bouquet of white peonies while I processed down the aisle toward a version of this day that I had not agreed to. Dana had heard everything from across the room. She set down her champagne flute without a sound. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts fury and devastation. "Claire," she said, one word, half question, half warning. I looked at myself in the mirror. The dress. The makeup. The gardenias. 120 people in the garden below, already seated, already waiting. My parents, who had flown in from Tucson. My business partner, Jamie, who had cried when I showed her the venue. Every vendor I had contacted, every contract I had signed, every Saturday I had spent building something that was supposed to be mine. And Marcus, who had approved this change without calling me. Who had sent a message through the wedding planner rather than walking to this suite himself. Who had said he would explain after. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked at Giselle and I asked her one question. "Is the ceremony starting on time?" She blinked. "Yes. 45 minutes. "Good," I said. "Let's keep it on time." Giselle left. Dana crossed the room and stood next to me at the mirror. "What are you doing?" she said. "I'm getting married," I said. "Claire." I looked at her. "I need you to trust me," I said. "Not yet. But I need you to trust me." She searched my face for something. Whatever she found there made her nod. We walked down together at noon. The processional played. Rosario walked in ahead of me in a cream-colored dress that I had not known she had purchased, and she stood to Marcus's left with my white peonies. I watched it happen from the back of the garden with my father's arm linked through mine. My father, who was a quiet and observant man, leaned close and said, in Spanish, "Do you want to keep walking?" "Yes," I said. And we did. The ceremony lasted 31 minutes. I know because I watched the second hand on the vintage clock mounted above the garden's iron gate every time I needed to remind myself that this was temporary, that 31 minutes was a finite and survivable thing. Marcus cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. Real tears, the kind that moved through his whole face and made his chin tremble. I had loved that face for 4 years. I stood across from it and said my vows in a clear, steady voice, and I meant every word, and I also knew, standing there, that the day was not over and that what came next would decide everything. Rosario stood to his left holding my peonies with her shoulders drawn back and her chin lifted, and I did not look at her once during the ceremony. Not once. The photographer captured this, though he did not know what he was capturing. There is a photograph from that day, taken during the ring exchange, in which Marcus is looking at me with his whole heart and I am looking at him with mine, and Rosario is looking at the camera with an expression of complete and settled satisfaction. That photograph became important later. The reception began at 4. The ballroom of the venue was everything I had designed it to be: warm light strung through exposed beams, long farm tables dressed in white linen, the olive trees from the garden visible through the open glass panels along the south wall. My company, Solís Creative, had produced dozens of events more elaborate than this one. I had never produced one that mattered to me the way this one did. I stood at the entrance of the ballroom with Marcus beside me and shook hands and accepted hugs and smiled at every person who came through, and I was present for all of it, and I was also keeping very close track of what was happening around me. Marcus had not explained anything yet. He had tried, once, just after the ceremony ended, catching my arm as the guests moved toward the cocktail hour. "Claire, I need to tell you about this morning." "I know," I said. "Later." He looked at me with something I could not quite read, relief or unease or both. "Okay," he said. "Later." At the reception, Rosario moved through the room the way a person moves when they believe the room belongs to them. She greeted guests warmly, directed people to their seats with the casual authority of a host, and at one point stood at the entrance to the ballroom beside Marcus's Aunt Fernanda, accepting congratulations from a couple I recognized as Marcus's clients, as though she were co-hosting the event. Dana appeared at my elbow during the salad course. She had been watching the room the way I had been watching it, carefully, from behind a composed expression. She leaned close. "The photographer has been following Rosario for the last 20 minutes, she said quietly. I looked. She was right. He was not doing it maliciously. He was doing it because she had been positioning herself near Marcus all evening, and Marcus was the groom, and so the photographer was simply capturing what was in front of him. What he was capturing was a record. After the salad course, I excused myself from the table and went to find Giselle. I found her near the catering station reviewing the dessert timeline. I asked her to walk with me for a moment. We stepped into the hallway outside the ballroom. "Giselle," I said. "I need the photographer to document some specific things tonight." She nodded, already knowing this was not a casual request. "Tell him I want chronological coverage of the head table. Every toast, every moment at that table, time-stamped. I also want him to photograph the guest book, the seating chart, and the bouquet arrangement as it is currently displayed." She looked at me. She had been in this industry for 14 years. She understood what documentation meant. "Consider it done," she said. "If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." The toasts began at 6:15. Emilio went first, warm and funny and brief, and he made Marcus laugh and made me laugh genuinely, and for about 4 minutes the night felt like what it was supposed to be. Dana went second. She had written her toast 3 months earlier and had read it to me in my apartment over a bottle of wine and made me cry with it. She read it beautifully, and when she reached the part about the kind of woman I had become and the kind of friend I was, her voice steadied in the way that voices steady when the speaker is working very hard to hold something together. I watched her do it and felt a wave of love for her that I have never found the right words for. Then Rosario stood up. She had not been assigned a toast. This was not on the program Giselle and I had finalized in October. She stood up between Dana sitting down and the band returning from their break, in the quiet window of transition when the room was still warm from Dana's words, and she picked up her champagne glass and she began to speak. She spoke for 11 minutes. I timed it. She spoke about Marcus's childhood, about the sacrifices she had made raising him after his father died, about the man she had shaped him into. She cried twice. The room responded to the tears each time the way rooms respond to tears at weddings, with murmurs of sympathy and the soft sound of people reaching for their napkins. She mentioned me twice. Once to say that she was grateful Marcus had found someone who made him smile, and once to say that she hoped I understood what it meant to marry into a family as devoted as theirs and to honor that devotion. She said that last part while looking directly at me. The room did not notice the precision of the look. Marcus, sitting beside me, reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it once. I squeezed back. My face did not change. When Rosario sat down, the room applauded, and she accepted the applause with her chin lifted and her hands folded in her lap, and I filed away the 11 minutes and the 2 mentions and the direct look at the end, and I added it to everything else I had been filing away all day, and I let the band start playing. We danced. Marcus held me close and whispered that he was sorry, that the morning had spiraled, that his mother had called him at 7 in a state of grief about his father, about missing him on this day, and that something in him had broken open and he had made a decision he had not thought through. I let him speak. When he finished, I said, "I understand that you were in pain this morning." He exhaled with relief. "I also need you to understand that you made a decision about my wedding without asking me, and that the woman who stood at this altar today with my flowers is going to need to understand that there are lines." He was quiet for a moment. The song played around us. "I know," he said. "I will talk to her." I nodded. We kept dancing. What Marcus did not know, because I had not told him, was that I had already spoken to Jamie. Jamie Park had been my business partner at Solís Creative for 3 years. She had the kind of mind that could hold 6 complex things simultaneously without dropping any of them, and she was sitting at table 7 with her husband and had been watching the evening with the same precision I had been. I had sent her a single text during the cocktail hour, from the hallway where I had spoken to Giselle, 3 words. "Document everything tonight." She had replied with 1 word. "Already am." This matters because of what happened 11 days later. But before I get to that, I need to tell you what I discovered in the days between the wedding and the confrontation, because the wedding itself, as painful as it was only the surface of what had been built underneath. Marcus and I left for our honeymoon in Oaxaca the morning after the wedding. I had planned the trip myself, 7 nights at a small boutique hotel in the Sierra Norte with a terrace that looked out over the valley. We arrived exhausted and stayed that way for 2 days, sleeping late, eating slowly, not talking about his mother at all. On the 3rd day, sitting on that terrace with coffee and the valley spread below us, Marcus brought it up. He said he had been thinking about what I said on the dance floor, about lines. He said he wanted to have a real conversation about his mother and about what our marriage was going to look like with her in it. I told him I wanted that too. He talked for a while about his father's death, about the way grief had made his mother clutch at the family she had left, about how her controlling behavior came from fear of loss. I listened. All of it was true. None of it was an excuse. When he finished, I told him that I had spent 2 years watching his mother chip away at our shared decisions, and that each time I raised it, the outcome was a phone call, her tears, and my patience being asked for again. I told him that the wedding was the moment that finished my patience, not because of the flowers or the processional, but because he had made a unilateral change to our ceremony without a conversation, and the mechanism that produced that decision was a private campaign his mother had run on him that I was not allowed to see or respond to. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "What do you need?" "I need to know what she said to you," I said. "Everything." "Starting from when?" "Starting from whenever she started working on you about the ceremony." He told me. It took 40 minutes. When he finished, I had a much clearer picture than I had the day before, and the picture was considerably worse. Rosario had not simply had an emotional morning. She had been working on Marcus for 6 weeks. The conversations about his father's absence at the wedding had begun in late October and had escalated in frequency and emotional intensity through November, through Thanksgiving, through the 2 weeks before the ceremony. She had framed it each time as grief, which it likely was, genuinely, but she had also framed it as a need that only one specific action could meet, standing at her son's left at the altar, holding the bride's flowers, occupying a role that had been designed for my closest friend in the world. She had also, during this period, told Marcus something that she had no basis for, and that was not true. She had told him that I was aware of her hope to stand at the altar and had agreed to think about it. I had never said this. I had said no, clearly, in October, and I had not revisited the conversation because I believed it was closed. She had represented my silence after that conversation as ongoing consideration. She had used my trust that the matter was settled as the window through which she walked. Marcus went pale when he understood what he had just told me. He said, "She said you were still thinking about it." "I told her no in October," I said. He put his face in his hands. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "There is something else I want you to think about carefully." He looked up. "If she was willing to misrepresent what I said in order to get what she wanted from you, in a private conversation you were never going to tell me about unless I asked directly, what else has she misrepresented?" He did not answer, because the answer was not something that could be produced in that moment. It was something that required time and honesty and a willingness to look at a person he loved through a different lens. I gave him that time. We came home from Oaxaca on a Sunday. On Monday morning, I called Jamie. We sat in my office with the door closed and 2 cups of coffee, and she laid out everything she had documented at the reception. She had been methodical. She had the photographer's full gallery, which she had requested a preview of with my written authorization, and she had flagged every image in which Rosario appeared in a role that was structurally mine. There were 47. She had the toast recording, captured on her husband's phone from table 7, all 11 minutes and 40 seconds of it. She had the seating chart as photographed, which showed that Rosario had at some point during the evening moved the small framed card that designated her seat at the family table so that it read, with a handwritten addition, "Mother of the groom and family host." She had noted it at 7:40 in the evening and photographed it. She had also done something I had not asked her to do and that I was deeply grateful for. She had spoken, quietly and professionally, to 4 vendors at the reception: the florist, the catering manager, the string quartet's lead musician, and the venue's event director. She had asked each of them, off the record, whether they had received communications from anyone other than me or Giselle regarding the event. All 4 said yes. All 4 named Rosario. The florist produced an email. The catering manager produced 2. The venue director produced a voicemail, still saved, in which Rosario identified herself as the wedding's primary planner and requested a change to the lighting configuration in the ballroom. None of these communications had been authorized. Several had resulted in changes that had required me to spend time and in 2 cases money correcting. I looked at the folder Jamie had assembled on the table between us. It was meticulous. It was comprehensive. It was, I realized, exactly what I had needed for 2 years and had never thought to build, because I had believed that asking was enough, that clarity was enough, that patience expressed clearly and repeatedly would eventually be understood as a limit. It had not been understood as a limit. It had been understood as an invitation to continue. There is something I want to say here about the quality of that realization, because I think it matters. I was not naive. I was not weak. I had built a company from nothing and run it well for 7 years and made hard decisions and held difficult conversations. But inside a family structure, inside a relationship I loved and wanted to protect, I had operated under a different set of rules. The rules that tell you that conflict is corrosive and that patience is generosity and that the person who keeps the peace is the person who loves the most. Those rules had cost me my Maid of Honor's bouquet and my ceremony processional and 11 minutes of a wedding toast and 2 years of small erasures that I had told myself did not count. They counted. They all counted. And the folder on Jamie's desk was proof that they had been deliberate. Jamie looked at me across the table. "What do you want to do with this?" she said. I thought about Marcus on the terrace in Oaxaca, his face in his hands. I thought about Rosario at the altar with her chin lifted and her hands full of my flowers. I thought about Giselle's expression in the hallway and Dana's voice holding steady through the toast and my father leaning close in the garden and asking, "Do you want to keep walking?" "Yes," I said. I thought about all of it. Then I told Jamie what I wanted to do. Solís Creative had been in a merger conversation for 14 months with a larger event and hospitality group called Meridian Collective, based in Dallas. Meridian had approached us first, impressed by a corporate conference we had produced for a Fortune 500 client in Houston, and the conversation had been progressing steadily since. Jamie and I were each 40% shareholders in Solís Creative, with the remaining 20 split between 2 early investors. The acquisition, if it closed, would value the company at $11.4 million. Rosario knew about the merger. I had mentioned it at a Sunday dinner the previous spring, briefly, in the way that you mentioned significant professional news to family. She had nodded and said that sounded lovely and returned the conversation to Marcus's opinion on a renovation she was considering for her guest bathroom. What Rosario did not know, because I had not mentioned it at Sunday dinner or anywhere else, was the timeline. The Meridian deal was scheduled to close in 11 days. There was a final presentation meeting, a standard due diligence review attended by both founding partners, our legal team, and the Meridian executive leadership, including their CEO and the 3-person acquisitions board. It was the kind of meeting that Rosario, who thought I ran a little events business, could not have conceived of and had not thought to ask about. 11 days, I said to Jamie. She nodded slowly, understanding. We have 11 days, I said, and I want Rosario in that room. Getting Rosario into that room required one phone call and no lies. That is the part one wants you to understand clearly, because what I did was not a trap in the way that word usually means. I did not fabricate anything. I did not manipulate anyone. I simply stopped withholding information from a woman who had spent 2 years making consequential decisions about my life based on the assumption that she knew everything about it. Marcus called his mother on a Tuesday evening, 9 days after we returned from Oaxaca, while I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and listened. He told her that Solís Creative was finalizing a major acquisition with a hospitality group out of Dallas. He told her the closing meeting was in 2 days. He told her that he was proud of Claire and that he wanted her to come. He did not tell her the valuation. He did not tell her who would be in the room. He told her only that it was important to him that his mother be present for an important moment in his wife's professional life, and that he hoped she would come. There was a pause on the line. Then Rosario said, "Of course, Mijo. Of course I will come." She said it warmly. She said it the way a woman says something when she believes she is being invited to observe and does not yet understand she is being invited to be seen. The night before the meeting I sat in our home office for 2 hours going over the presentation Jamie and I had prepared for Meridian. It was the same presentation we had been refining for 14 months, but I reviewed it the way you review something when you want to know it not just professionally but personally, the way you review something when the stakes have expanded beyond the boardroom. I knew every slide. I knew every number. I knew the growth curve of Solís Creative from its first year, when I had worked out of a rented desk in a shared office space in East Austin and produced 4 events totaling $80,000 in revenue, through the current fiscal year, which was tracking to close at $2.3 million. I knew the client list, 41 active accounts, 17 of which were Fortune 500 or equivalent. I knew the margin structure, the staffing model, the IP portfolio, the proprietary event management software my team had built over 3 years that Meridian had specifically cited as a key driver of the acquisition valuation. I knew what $11.4 million meant in practical terms, and I knew what it had cost to build something worth that number, and I was not ashamed of any of it, and I was finished allowing it to be called a little events business in my presence or out of it. Dana called me at 10 that night. She had known about the meeting for 4 days, which was approximately how long it had taken me to decide to tell her, because I wanted to be certain I was not doing something driven by anger before I brought anyone else into it. "You sure about this?" she said. "Completely," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. "Wear the charcoal suit." I wore the charcoal suit. The Meridian meeting was held at the offices of our shared legal counsel, a firm called Hargrove Sloan on the 42nd floor of a tower in downtown Austin with a view of the river and a conference room that seated 20 comfortably. Jamie and I arrived at 8:15. Our legal team arrived at 8:30. The Meridian executives, 4 of them including their CEO, a measured and precise woman named Catherine Mwangi who I had come to respect deeply over 14 months of negotiation, arrived at 8:45. Marcus arrived at 8:50 with Rosario beside him. I watched her walk into the room. She was dressed well, a deep burgundy blazer and pressed trousers, her silver hair immaculate, her gold cross at her collarbone. She looked at the conference table, at the Meridian team, at the legal documents stacked in labeled folders at each seat, and I saw her process the room and decide that it was impressive without yet understanding what it was. She kissed me on both cheeks. She told me the offices were beautiful. She sat in the chair Marcus pulled out for her against the wall, a step behind the table, where observers sat. I thanked everyone for coming. I introduced the Solís creative team and the Meridian team and our legal counsel. Catherine Mwangi introduced herself and her colleagues with the efficient warmth of someone who had run 100 of these meetings and knew exactly what made them work. Then I began. The presentation ran 40 minutes. Jamie and I had divided it the way we always did, her leading the operational and financial sections, me leading the strategic narrative and the vision for the combined entity post-acquisition. I had given versions of this presentation to investors, to clients, to industry panels. I had given it in hotel ballrooms and startup incubators and once, memorably, in a borrowed conference room in Mexico City during a trade event where the projector failed and I delivered the entire thing from memory standing in front of a whiteboard. This version was the best I had ever given. Not because I was performing for Rosario. I want to be honest about that. I was not performing. I was doing my work at the level I had always done it, with the full weight of what I had built behind every word. What was different was that the full weight of what I had built was finally in the same room as the woman who had decided, without ever asking a question or looking at a number, that it amounted to nothing. I did not look at Rosario during the presentation. Not once. I was speaking to Catherine Mwangi and her board. I was speaking to the room that mattered. But I was aware, in the precise and calibrated way that you are aware of something you have chosen not to focus on, that Rosario was sitting against the wall watching a version of her daughter-in-law she had never permitted herself to see. The financial slide came 40 minutes in. Jamie put the numbers on the screen. Current annual revenue, 2.3 million. 3-year growth rate, 240%. Acquisition valuation, $11.4 million. Client retention rate, 91% over 4 years. Proprietary technology assets assessed independently at 1.2 million. I heard a sound from the chair against the wall. Very small. The sound a person makes when something lands that they were not prepared for. I did not turn around. Catherine Mwangi asked 3 questions after the presentation, all of them sharp and specific and already answered in the documentation her team had reviewed, which meant she was asking them to hear how I responded in real time, which is what sophisticated buyers do when they want to know who they are actually acquiring. I answered all 3 without notes. Then she looked at me across the table and said, "Claire, we are ready to move forward. We'd like to close this by end of week." I said that worked for us. The room shifted into the procedural rhythm of a deal closing, lawyers comparing language, executives initialing pages, the quiet, efficient machinery of a transaction that had been 14 months in the building. Marcus came to stand beside me during the document review. He put his hand on my back, between my shoulder blades, and kept it there. After 20 minutes, Rosario stood up from her chair against the wall. She moved toward the refreshment table near the window. I watched her in my peripheral vision as she poured herself a glass of water and stood there for a moment looking out at the river. Then she turned and walked toward me. The lawyers were still working. Catherine Mwangi was in a quiet conversation with her acquisitions lead. Marcus stepped slightly aside. Rosario stopped in front of me. She was holding her water glass with both hands. Her expression was not the expression she had worn at the altar or the reception or the Sunday dinners. It was something I had not seen from her before. It was the expression of a woman who has just discovered that the map she has been using is wrong and is trying to understand how far off course she is. "Claire," she said. My voice, when I answered, was the voice I use in rooms like this one. Steady, clear, unhurried. "Yes, Rosario." I watched her work through whatever she had decided to say. I could see the versions of it moving across her face. Finally she said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "I did not know." I held her gaze. "I know you didn't," I said. And then I said the only other thing I needed to say. "But I did." She stood there for a moment. The water glass was very still in her hands. I let the silence do what silence does when the right words have just been spoken into it. Then I said, "Excuse me," because Catherine Mwangi was gesturing toward the signature page, and I crossed the room to sign my name to the document that closed the acquisition of Solís Creative, the company I had built from a rented desk and 4 events and a relentless and private conviction that I knew exactly what I was doing. I signed with a pen Catherine handed me, a good pen, heavy and clean, and I signed clearly, my full name, Claire Renata Solís, and I set the pen down and shook Catherine's hand and felt $11.4 million and 14 months and 7 years settle into something that was finally complete. What happened after is not a clean story. I want to be honest about that because the Clara Weston stories that mean something to me are the ones that do not pretend the aftermath is simple. Marcus and I drove home in near silence, with Rosario following in her own car. When we got to the house, Marcus made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table and Rosario sat across from us, and for the first time in 2 years she did not speak first. Marcus spoke. He said that he had not understood until the meeting what the last 2 years had looked like from my side. He said that he had told himself each incident was small and that small things did not compound, and that he had been wrong. He said he owed me an accounting that was going to take longer than one conversation and that he was prepared to give it. Then he looked at his mother. He told her that what she had done at the wedding, the 6 weeks of private maneuvering, the misrepresentation of what I had said, the bouquet, the toast, all of it, had been a harm he had allowed by failing to act on what I had been telling him for 2 years. He said he was not going to allow it again. He said this in Spanish, deliberately, so there was no possibility of misunderstanding. Rosario listened. She did not cry. That was what surprised me most. The woman who had cried at every prior confrontation about her behavior, who had made her tears the mechanism by which the conversation ended and my patience was asked for again, sat across from her son and her daughter-in-law and did not cry. She said, "I thought I was protecting him." Marcus said, "From what, Mom?" She did not answer for a long time. Then she said, "From choosing someone over me." There it was. 2 years of engineered chaos and redirected flowers and 11-minute toasts and misrepresented conversations, and underneath all of it was a 63-year-old woman who had lost her husband when her son was 17 and had spent the decades since making sure nothing and no one would ever displace her from the center of his life. I understood it. I had understood it for a long time. Understanding it had not protected me from it, and understanding it now did not obligate me to absorb it going forward. But it clarified something. The enemy was not Rosario's malice. The enemy was Rosario's fear, which she had never once examined, and which she had allowed to act on the world in my name and at my expense because no one, not Marcus, not his brother, not his aunts, had ever made the cost of it real to her. The cost was real now. I told her one thing. I told her that going forward I was not available to be managed, minimized, or maneuvered around, and that if she wanted a relationship with her son and with me, it would be built on an accurate understanding of who I was and what I had built and what I was owed as a partner in this marriage. I told her I was not asking for her approval. I was telling her the terms. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. One small, slow movement of her head. The deal with Meridian closed on Friday of that week. My share of the acquisition came to $4.5 million after legal fees and the investor distribution. I rolled a portion back into the new entity in a retained equity position, which meant I would continue to lead the Austin operation under the Meridian Collective banner with Jamie as my co-director. The day the wire hit my account I sat at my desk for about 10 minutes doing nothing at all. Then I called Dana. She answered on the second ring. "Is it done?" she said. "It's done," I said. She made a sound that was half laugh and half something closer to grief, the way people sound when they have been holding something on your behalf for a long time and are finally allowed to put it down. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "You should have had those peonies." "I know," I said. She laughed. We talked for an hour. The fallout for Rosario was quieter than I had expected and more permanent than I had feared. The room at the closing meeting had included 12 people outside our immediate family. Word moved the way word moves in professional communities, carefully but completely, through the specific channels that matter. Two of Marcus's cousins who worked in hospitality reached out to me in the weeks after the deal closed, not about the acquisition specifically but in ways that made clear they had heard enough to recalibrate their understanding of who I was. One of them sent me a referral. 3 vendors who had received unauthorized communications from Rosario over the wedding planning period were informed, professionally and without drama, that all future communications regarding Solís creative events would come exclusively from me or Jamie. Rosario's self-appointed role as coordinator of anything related to my professional life ceased to exist because it had been built entirely on the assumption that no one would ever look at it directly. When people looked at it directly, it dissolved. With Marcus, the work was slower and more honest and more expensive than any other part of what happened that year. We went to couples counseling for 8 months. The therapist was a direct and unsentimental woman named Dr. Patricia Okafor who did not allow either of us to use the other's behavior as a reason to stop looking at our own. What I learned in that process was not primarily about Rosario. It was about the choices I had made for 2 years to express my limits without enforcing them, and the price of that pattern, and the way I intended to live going forward. Marcus learned things too. Hard things. Things about the specific shape of his avoidance and what it had cost his wife and what it would cost him if he chose it again. He did the work. That matters. I want to say that clearly because it is true and because the story of what happened in year 2 of our marriage is also the story of a man who finally chose his wife over his comfort and did it without being forced. Rosario came to our home for Sunday dinner 6 weeks after the acquisition closed. It was the first time she had been to the house since before the wedding. She brought tamales she had made herself. She sat at our table and talked about Marcus's cousin's new baby and about a documentary she had watched about Oaxacan textile artists. She did not offer opinions about my business. She did not redirect the conversation to herself when I spoke. She was not warm in the uncomplicated way she had been warm in the beginning, the warm that was really reconnaissance. She was something more careful and more honest. Tentative, in the way that people are tentative when they are trying to learn a new language and know they will make mistakes and are not certain they will be forgiven for them. I did not make it easy. I also did not make it impossible. I passed her the rice and answered her questions directly and let her be a person in my home instead of a threat in it, because she had made one honest movement toward me and I believed in meeting honesty with honesty even when it was difficult and even when the history behind it was not resolved and might never be fully resolved. Dana came to that same Sunday dinner. I had invited her specifically. She and Rosario had not been in the same room since the wedding. Dana, who is the most precise reader of people I have ever known, sat across from Rosario for 3 hours and afterward told me in the car that she thought the woman was genuinely trying. I said I thought so too. I also said that trying was the beginning of a long road and not the end of one. Dana agreed. She stole one of the leftover tamales from the foil on my kitchen counter and ate it on the drive home and said it was the best thing she had eaten all month. That made me laugh harder than anything had made me laugh in a long time, and I was grateful for it. The photograph from the wedding, the one with Marcus looking at me and Rosario looking at the camera with her chin lifted and her hands full of my peonies, sits in a folder on my laptop that I have not printed and do not intend to. Not because I am punishing anyone with its absence. Because I do not need it on a wall. I know what it contains. I know what it was the first frame of and what the rest of the story became. The second photograph from that day, the one I printed and framed, is from the reception. Marcus and I on the dance floor, my head tipped back laughing at something he has just said into my ear, his hand at the small of my back, the olive trees visible through the open glass panels, the warm string light catching the edge of my dress. Dana told the photographer to take it. She was watching us from across the room, holding a glass of champagne, keeping track, the way she always has. In that photograph I am wearing my wedding ring and the charcoal of the room is warm and Marcus's face is full of something uncomplicated and I look, I think, like a woman who has made a decision and is at peace with it. I am. What the wedding day taught me was not about Rosario. It was not even, ultimately, about Marcus. It was about the specific and personal cost of making yourself smaller to keep a peace that was never real peace. I had done it in that ballroom and in those Sunday dinners and in 2 years of phone calls and vendor corrections and patient, careful conversations that produced nothing durable because patience without consequence is not a boundary. It is an invitation. I am not patient in that way anymore. I am still kind. I am still generous. I will still pass you the rice. But I know what I built and what it is worth and what I am owed for it. And the next time someone stands in front of me and decides without evidence that I am less than I am, they will learn what Rosario learned in that conference room on the 42nd floor, with the river below and 12 witnesses present and the pen still warm in my hand. They will learn it quietly and completely and without a single raised voice. Because the quiet ones, the ones who are building something in the hours no one is watching, who are documenting and preparing and waiting for the room where the truth can land with the people who need to hear it, we were never actually quiet. We were just waiting for the moment to be exactly right. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you will really enjoy them. And do not forget to subscribe if you have not already. See you in the next story.